Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Climate Change Media Hub, Asian College of Journalism's third webinar in this series. This initiative is supported by the Interlink Academy from Germany. We are hosting a session today on covering climate in India, a solution and constructive lens. So today we're going to talk about how climate stories in India can move beyond crisis reporting to focusing on solutions, adaptations, resilience, and constructive narratives. And we have with us Sinara Vech and Joydeep Gupta. Just a bit about me. I'm an independent multimedia journalist and editor, and I cover the socioeconomics of gender, environment, and health. I am a resident with the Asian College of Journalism's Climate Media Hub. Sinara is a project lead with the international projects and partnerships at the Constructive Institute based in Denmark. In her role, she supports journalists in efforts to serve society better by fostering constructive approaches to news coverage, particularly on climate change. Sinara and I worked together on a fantastic project last year in Denmark called the Constructive Climate Lens. She has more than a decade of experience with international news broadcasters, including Al Jazeera, BBC, CCTV Africa, and has led media development projects in various regions. Joydeep Gupta is the India Program Manager at the Earth Journalism Network, where he trains environmental journalists and supports climate and environment reporting across South Asia. He's an award-winning and experienced environmental journalist, writing on climate change, water, biodiversity, pollution, and sustainable development. He has covered the Earth Summit and every UN Climate Summit since 2007 and has received awards for his environmental journalism. So the structure for today will be that Sinara will begin with explaining what constructive and solutions journalism looks like and leading us through what these approaches mean in reality. And then we will have Joydeep give us solid case studies from India and explain the do's and don'ts and how we go about doing this in practice. So over to you, Sinara. We will also have a Q&A at the end for 15 minutes. So in the meanwhile, if you have any thoughts and questions, you can start jotting them down on the chat as well. But we'll take the questions in the end.
Great. Thanks so much, Mahima, and really great to be here. I had a great introduction from Mahima, so I don't need to say a lot about myself. So what I want to say at the start is I am not in a position to tell you how to cover climate constructively or otherwise in India. And I think looking at Joydeep's presentation, I can see that deep experience. But what I'm here to talk about is how I and my institute has been thinking about approaches to the global news industry in general, and also how these can be used specifically to cover climate and to kind of tackle some of the challenges around reporting climate change. So yeah, I'll skip over this quickly. Mahima gave me a really great intro, just to say that before joining the Constructive Institute, I was working in international news for about a decade, and I got very disillusioned with the global news industry. And I found I was working a lot in Africa and the Middle East and working in journalism and innovation to meet the needs of audiences in those regions. And I found that across these different international news organizations, we were showing a very narrow view of what the reality was on the ground. And that really made me question a lot about journalism in general. And I ended up at the Constructive Institute, where there were these discussions in the Nordics about what different and better approaches could be to the news industry. So that's how I ended up here at the Constructive Institute. We're an NGO based in Aarhus University. We're independent and we work with newsrooms and journalists across the world, looking at how we can support them in constructive approaches, which I'll go into now. Basically, what we're trying to tackle is a culture that has been in the news industry since the beginning of time, since the first Reuters news agency, which is really digging out the worst in the world and exposing it and holding truth to power. And both of these are very important things to do, and we stand by them. But we feel there is more to journalism. So we really like this quote by Harold Evans. He's a very well-renowned newspaper editor in the UK. And he says, before interviewing any politician, ask yourself, why is this bastard lying to you? And it's this frame of assume that there is something that is covered up. Walk into the room believing that someone's going to be lying to you or something's going to be hidden, and your role is to uncover this. And I think we all know the Watergate scandal and the huge role that journalists played in bringing down a president, basically, and showing that the power that journalism can have to unroot corruption and wrongdoing. And many journalists have gone in wanting to be Robert Redford. My pin-up was Christiane Amanpour on CNN. When I started journalism, I wanted to be there at the front line, showing all of the biggest crises that were happening in the world, and bringing that into the tension of everyone. And again, there was this whole, with the 24-hour news cycle of CNN. There was this whole phenomenon called the CNN effect, which is where a 24-hour news cycle could actually move policy. That if you had these images put on the screen, politicians would have to move, they'd have to change things, they couldn't hide away from the truth. But the paradox of this CNN effect is that having these images constantly on 24 hours has led to news fatigue and people being overwhelmed by the amount of news and the problems and challenges in the world that they can see on their TV screens, but also on their phones, on all the time. And as journalists, we're now in a battle of attention with digital disruption. We're not only now fighting for attention with other journalists, but we're fighting for attention with Netflix, with all kinds of entertainment. And this has meant that these news culture and this mindset of journalists of holding truth to power and showing the problems that are in our world have become more and more exacerbated. And we are working with tighter deadlines, with less money, with smaller audiences. And so this culture that has this news culture that has many benefits to it has become more and more and more extreme. So what's the problem with this? Well, it's not to say that the problems of the world have gone away. There is still many bad actors and there are still challenges that journalists need to unpack. But we can be in danger of turning our attention away from all that is working and all that organizations, individuals are attempting to do to meet these challenges. And that shows a skewed picture of reality. This is a study by some New Zealand academics who looked at the news headlines in the US from 2000 to 2019. And they saw that across the board, emotions evoked, like headlines that would make you angry or disgusted or fearful or sad, all went up. Neutral headlines that just gave you the facts and just stated out what issues went completely down. And this is to do with the fight for attention, but also algorithms that are exacerbating these. So journalists know that in order to get clicks and likes, you have to up the outrage button. You have to up all of these negative emotions. And this has led to Heba Ali, who just formerly was the CEO of the New Humanitarian, which is a news outlet which covers all the central humanitarian crises of the world, to say that actually one of the things we should be worrying about as journalism is not fake news, although that's definitely there. That's not the only problem. You can have very accurate news, but it's not necessarily healthy and of benefit to people. And with these sharp headlines and amping up the outrage and the fear, actually, this is a kind of junk news where, yes, maybe it leads to clicks and likes, but it's unhealthy for society. Just as people maybe crave a McDonald's, but ultimately you're making them sick. Maybe people click on the outrage headline, but but over time, it overwhelms them. And this has led to people writing books about how we should not consume news or how to protect yourself against news, which is kind of amazing if you think about it, that people have sat down and said, how do we battle the negative effects of the news industry on us? And I think you probably all follow the Reuters news reports, which talk about how every year more and more people are avoiding the news. And we work with the global news industry, and this is a global phenomenon. You can see all these countries here, people are avoiding the news, but India is quite high up there. It's like you can see it's like kind of fifth down the chart. And it's not a mystery. We are told by respondents every year why they avoid the news. And it's not so much that it's fake, although, I mean, there are trust issues, but it's things like it has a negative effect on my mood. I feel worn out by it. There's too much coverage of conflict, war. I mean, could you say crises in general? Maybe this also speaks to ongoing crises like climate change. And then things like politics. And then also, there's nothing I can do with this. You give me all these problems, but what am I supposed to do about them? So we know why people are turning away from the news. And this is particularly difficult for journalists like you who are covering climate change, which is an ongoing crisis that is going nowhere and has been going on for a long time. We can see lessons from the global pandemic. Initially, audiences and citizens around the world really turned to trusted news sources. They were fearful and needed to go to brands and journalists that could help them sort the reality from the hype. And so public trusted news sources went up. And actually, initially, it was a great time for journalism, and you could see the value in it. When things are really bad, journalism is needed more than ever. But and just to say, and this also sorted, opinion and social media kind of chatter from trusted brands and trusted reporting. But a year on, interest started to go down. And when asked why are you not turning to the news for this coverage of the global pandemic, people said that they found it repetitive. You're still talking about the global pandemic. I'm confused. There's just too much information out there, and I'm depressed. And this is the similar kind of dynamic that we're dealing here with climate change coverage. It is so important. You could even say it's the key topic of our time. Like, if journalists need to get anything right, they need to get right how to cover this existential issue that the whole world is facing. But it's hard to retain attention with an ongoing crisis. It's hard to not overwhelm people with the negativity. It's very complex, and it seems never ending. So it's a big challenge that you all have to face to really engage in this topic and keep your audiences with you. Why can't I? On to the next slide. We did a conference a year or so back where we looked at how we could tackle climate change better. And we talked to these young 20-year-olds, young Danish 20-year-olds. And both of them had written to the biggest newspapers in Denmark to say, we are the Atlas generation. I don't know whether you know the story of Atlas, but it's a Greek myth where Atlas had to carry the whole world on his shoulders. And they said, we have to carry the world on our shoulders. We're in our 20s. We understand that the climate crisis is here, and we are the ones that have to face this and find ways forward through it. But we need the news industry to help us find pathways forward. You know, we don't know the information. We're just a bunch of young 20-year-olds. We're depending on journalists. But when we look at your coverage, all we see is crisis. And that just overwhelms us. That doesn't help us. We need pathways forward. And I thought that was reassuring that the youth still looks to journalism to support it and help it analyze what's going on, but also a problem if reporting is not meeting their needs. So what are they looking for? What are these 20-year-olds looking for? What are these audiences that turning away looking for? And again, they tell us again and again each year, they want stuff that suggests solutions, not just the problems. They need help navigating the complexity of all of this overwhelming volumes of content. And then they still want those traditional things, investigating wrongdoing, abuse of power, the key stories of the day. And a lot of journalism outlets covering climate are beginning to see that this really is a necessary way forward. Covering Climate Now is an organization that's brought different newsrooms together to cover climate and learn from each other and find better ways to do it. And they have solutions journalism really as a pillar to keep audiences engaged. But it's not just solutions. It's to tone down the sensationalism, to tone down the extreme stories of just crisis and disaster around climate change, and often more nuance and analysis and calm and curious reporting. And really what we're talking about here is the role of journalism and what it means and needs to be for society. And that watchdog role of the Watergate and also, you know, the CNN on the front lines is not going away. We don't want to tone down the power of that journalism. But David Bornstein, who started the Solutions Journalism Network, which is kind of a sister organization in the States to ours, talked about how you actually are sharpening the teeth of watchdog journalism when you point to solutions. Because if you point out the problems and then identify potential solutions, then you can go to politicians and you can say, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you working towards fixing these issues or looking at policy that can help? There are ways forward. If you just point to the problem, you're left with nothing. And an academic in Denmark called Peter Bro has been exploring what roles do journalists hold in society. And he says, actually, the watchdog role is only one role. You hold power to account, you point out the problem, job done, walk away. But actually, are there other roles that journalists need to play? And he talks about roles like the sheepdog, where you bring people together to facilitate discussion. Who thinks what about this issue and what are pathways forward? Or you challenge, with the hunting dog role, you challenge the powerful to say, well, what are you going to do about it? So I think we need to go beyond those roles that I spoke in the beginning and think about what journalists can do to serve society. And that really is what constructive journalism is all about. And I think it's very easy to be overwhelmed by endless buzzwords and the latest thing that you need to do in reporting, and here's another fad. But actually, it's really simple. Why we call it constructive journalism is any journalism that has useful or beneficial purpose to society. And our reading on this is that actually some journalism isn't useful and beneficial. It is junk news. It is there to spark outrage or, in fact, evoke any kind of extreme emotion. And that doesn't serve society. That doesn't increase in understanding. So we're not, oh, Mahima, am I running out of time?
Yes, maybe another minute, Sinara.
Oh no. Okay. Okay. So we are not activism, we are not positive journalism. We sit there alongside these issues. And what we're saying is breaking news with all its value of giving you the key information when you need it. When a bomb goes off, reporters need to be there to tell people what's happened. Investigative journalism still remains incredibly important. Once something like a bomb has gone off, we need to know who's done it and why, and be critical. But what we're arguing for is another layer to go beyond that and talk about what does society need to do now? How can we change it for the future? And I'm going to skip through. And there are three pillars to this. There is the focus on solutions, but we also need to cover the nuances and really unpack the complexity of these issues and be really curious about them, not come up with simplistic answers, and facilitate dramatic conversation. And then just to say really quickly at the end, we believe that climate change is a key area where we really need to explore these ideas. So we brought 5 journalists from 5 continents to our institute in Denmark. Mahima was one of them, to really find out what do these ideas and approaches mean in different media contexts, in different regions. And this was my co-director who worked on a big European report for all the public service media across Europe. And the report was called Climate Journalism That Works, and you should dig into it. And what she really found from this report was that climate coverage is so much more than crisis reporting. It's actually exploring what the future of a sustainable future is for our societies. And it's Wolfgang Blau, who was the founder of the Oxford Climate Network, called it the biggest reconstruction story since the Second World War. This is everything about the world and how we need to move towards that future. So check out what Mahima and her colleagues worked on. It's called the Constructive Climate Lens. They really thought through how these constructive approaches could work for climate coverage. And they have really kind of detailed, practical tips and tricks from everything from the words that you use in your climate reporting to the images alongside them, and then how you can work with scientists to really partner journalism and science to inform the public. And then they've dug into specific deep issues. Thank you so much. Sorry it was rushed towards the end, but great to talk to you all.
Thank you, Sinara. If you all have any questions for Sinara, please do leave them in, keep them with you or leave them in the chats, and we'll take it in the end. So Sinara has now set the broader global context and grounding for why we need solutions-oriented approaches, and why are we at this time where people are turning away from the news, and what is the challenge in front of climate journalists. I want to now bring the conversation closer home and talk to Joydeep and ask him what he has seen when he supported and helped shape so many journalists in India. It's almost like a rite of passage for many environmental journalists to go through EJN's support. So I'd love to hear from you, Joydeep, about what this looks like on ground here, the gaps you see in current climate coverage, and what are the methods we can use to do better climate journalism?
Well, thank you. Thank you. I see a lot of my friends on this call, which is great. How long do I have, Mahima?
You have about 20 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. Let me start by sharing my screen so that we can figure out how that works. Okay, let's see if this works. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can. Please.
Okay. Okay, all right. So as Sinara pointed out, it's people are quite overwhelmed by the doom and gloom stories. So I don't think I need to tell you people about this. And how it's leading to news avoidance. And so I'll go through this quickly. In fact, I want to go through this entire presentation quickly so that we can have maximum time for Q&A and a discussion. But it's also showed, especially the Covering the Planet report showed that there is a hunger for solution-focused coverage, and there is an strong interest now, an increasing interest from journalists that we should be doing solution stories. Our audiences are telling us to do solution stories, but how do we do good solution stories without it turning into PR? That is the issue. That is the whole issue. And of course, stories centering local issues and initiatives are more welcome than others all the time. And so I think the important, it's now goes without saying that solution stories are good, they need to be done. But I think it's very important when we do solution stories that we put them through the same rigor as we do while doing investigative stories to analyze exactly what's going on. So somebody comes and tells us that there's a success story. We should analyze that as carefully as we analyze a crooked balance sheet. So what are the challenges that a project is facing? What are the limitations? And irrespective of who is telling us this, community, government, private sector. And if we do this, now, as Sinara also pointed out, if we actually do good and well-researched and credible solution stories, we actually manage to foster community support for climate action. Not only from the community, as the first step, they also encourage policymakers to do more. So I think solutions journalism is getting more and more important, essentially for reasons I don't need to go into with this audience. But I think we need to remind ourselves to be as skeptical of solutions presented to us as we are of any other information presented to us. Remember the Harold Evans quote that Sinara put up. I'll just give you 3 examples. Yeah, and I'm at this stage, I don't think I'll go into those stories in detail, but if you want, I can go into those stories in detail, so that I can try to illustrate the point I'm trying to make. Now, this is a story on how, by Varsha, on Down to Earth, on how Uttarakhand's women villagers are defending forests from wildfires, from forest fires. How they have set up Mahila Mangal Dals, that's women's welfare groups, for this purpose. How they have set up WhatsApp groups for this purpose, so that there is very quick information sharing, very quick early warning, and now that how they have been trained on how to fight a forest fire. because fighting a forest fire is not something one can do totally untrained. There are ways to do it, and ways to try to contain the fire, and they have gone through it, and it has actually worked. So this is a story which is quite an interesting story on how Uttarakhand's women villages are defending their forests. Now, what I like about this story is not only detailed reportage on how the women are working, how the local community groups are working, how the local bureaucrats are working, but also the limitations of this approach. Because it is clear that the amount of money that allocated by the state government for this is inadequate. It does not say so in so many words in the story. It just says that it's facts. All it says, it tells you how much money the state government is putting into these schemes. And the moment you see those numbers, you know that that cannot possibly be good enough for a whole state. So I think it adds to the credibility of the story when you do this. It adds to the credibility of the story when you are both reporting, both with the people who are talking about a particular success or a particular solution, and people who are skeptical of it. In this particular case, there are other groups who are skeptical of it. People who have been running NGOs, especially women-focused NGOs in Uttarakhand for years. And they're asking, perhaps quite legitimately, why set up another whole structure of people to do this when you already have NGOs and other groups working in these areas where forest fires are becoming more and more intense and more frequent. So why are you setting up parallel groups? And they are seriously asking if this is a way for the state government to take over local community efforts. It's an important question. And I think along with the solution story, if you raise these questions when you're doing your stories, you'll A, have a better story, and B, a more credible story. Let me go to the next one. This is actually a follow-up of a whole series of stories we had done for a long time. We had along the India-Nepal border, we had done a lot of stories on how early warning systems work to warn people to run away, to save themselves, to save their homes. Not homes, you cannot save the home, but whatever they can, their livestock, as much of the stored grain as they can when there are floods coming. So this is a follow-up story that was done for Pari, that yes, we are getting early warnings. This gentleman who you see in the picture is quoted in the story as saying, yeah, I got 2 hours warning. That the river that flows through my village called Rato is started flooding in upstream Nepal. I got information from the WhatsApp group there, through to which we are connected, that yeah, you better take care. But then, what do I do? And this is the follow-up story that people repeatedly asking. So I'm getting the information. I'm able to run away, but where do I run? If there is no boat available by the government, very few people have their own boats to escape to safer places during a flood. Very few people have, even fewer people have boats big enough to carry their food grain with them or their livestock with them. So at best, if you have a boat, you can sort of row you yourself and your family to a safer place. Otherwise, okay, you got a warning. What do you do with it? There are interviewees in the story who say, yeah, we got a warning. So what we did was that we put 5 bricks under each leg of our cot so that the flood waters wouldn't reach us. There was nothing else we could do. We had nowhere to go, or we had no means. The government did not provide any boats. We had no idea where the refugee shelter camp would be. So yeah, we did the best we could with the warning. Put 5 bricks each on each leg to raise our cot. And the same interviewee is quoted as saying that the water overwhelmed it. They were sitting on the cot with an emergency ration of rice and dal, and there was a point when the water rose to the level of the cot. They then, between the husband and the wife, they dragged another cot on top of this cot, and the whole family, 4 of them, husband, wife, and 2 kids, spent the next 48 hours sitting on that upper cot. Well, all their grains rotted away. Their whole year's work was gone. So, and this is in a situation where the reporter then goes and asks the government, so in this situation, the people have got an early warning, you've got an early warning, what have you done? And the government says, oh yeah, we have the scheme to have boats to ferry people to relief camps whenever that happens. And then the reporter goes back and asks the people, have you seen those boats? And the unanimous answer is no. So, in a nutshell, this story is about how a solution is a partial solution. An important solution is a partial solution. People are now able to save themselves. In some cases, they're able to save their livestock. But in most cases, they're unable to save their grains. If they're living in kacha houses, they're unable to save those houses. Because even with a 2-hour warning or even a 4-hour warning, it's physically impossible to do anything. Again, I think this is an important story for policymakers because it does not sensationalize saying that, oh, the floods killed so many. The government is doing nothing. It tells you this is what is actually happening, and these are the lacunae in what should be happening, and how this involves thousands and hundreds of thousands of people. So I think I'll go to the next and last example, and then we can maybe pause a bit in case there are queries. Now, this one is from Tamil Nadu. I chose this largely because we are talking to a phalanx at the Asian College of Journalism, and maybe there are people from Tamil Nadu joining this call. Now, this is, if you are at the Asian College of Journalism, if you study there, if you teach there, you would probably be seeing this photo, what is shown in this photo. E-rickshaws with that sell vegetables and fruits, and that have the manjapai. The manjapai is that yellow cloth bag that you can see in the photo. And that is something that is now being used, pushed to replace plastic bags while people go shopping. Now, this is a story that talks about how having these e-rickshaws under the climate change scheme of the Tamil Nadu government has helped these people. It talks about other schemes of the Tamil Nadu government that have also helped people, especially in drought-prone districts like Virudhunagar, where ponds have been dug and the groundwater levels have improved a lot. But it also points out that only 100 e-rickshaws have been distributed in all of Chennai and nothing beyond Chennai. So how many women vegetable and fruit vendors are there in Tamil Nadu? Must be millions. So it points out that a solutions is a solution only if it is scaled out, or if it is able to be scaled out. If it is able to be scaled up and scaled out. Unless that happens, unless the state government provides the requisite money and the infrastructure for this, then a solution remains a partial solution. So uneven rollouts. Ask about the women excluded from the state's initiatives. I'm not very happy with the way the story has been written, because I think this sort of listing of all the initiatives, and then come the criticism and putting it in perspective. I think at least there should have been a mention of the criticism and the putting it in perspective in the first or second paragraph, so that the reader knew that it wasn't going to be a one-sided story. It is not a one-sided story, but you have to go wade through some 25 or 30 paragraphs to realize that it's not a one-sided story. Apart from the heading, there's no other indication of that. So I'm not happy with the way the story has been written and edited, but it provides a good example of reportage that does this, talks about a solution and the limitations of that solution. I'm going to pause here for a moment in case and look at the chat box in case there are queries before I go ahead.
There don't seem to be any in the chat box, but if someone wants to ask right now. Yes, Srini, please go ahead. You are on mute. You might have to unmute yourself.
Yeah. All right. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. So this thing is that why is it that newsrooms and newsroom managements see so little value in solutions journalism? How do we, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a very large chunk of whatever falls under the broad definition of solutions journalism is actually grant driven in some form or the other, which comes with its own problems, right? Because any grant, no matter how well intentioned, already pre-shapes a narrative. So why is it that newsrooms are not seeing the value in investing resources in solutions journalism of themselves? Why is it that it still has to be funded externally?
Well,
So what's missing in the sales pitch for a solution story?
Srini, you have led many more newsrooms than I have. You should answer the question first. No, but seriously, I think whether it's a solution story or even a problem story.
Srini, you're on mute again. I don't know if you were trying to say something. So, and Sinara, if you want to jump in.
Yeah. So no, very quickly, I think how, the thing is that it all comes down to how big a part do they see this whole subject of climate and related issues being part of their core business. So if you're a general newspaper, how big a part do you see this of your work? How much do you want to give to politics, to crime, to other civic issues? And therefore the money gets divided. So problem one is that even now, this is not on the main agenda for most traditional news media organization, television, print, whatever. And the second problem, of course, is the larger problem, which is constricting everything, which is the consistently declining revenues and budgets.
Yeah, the second problem, I think, is even more acute. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
You're perfectly right. The thing is, so there are some surveys which are showing that climate coverage in the Indian media over the last couple of decades has gone from 1% to 6%. So that's it. I don't know how you look at that, whether you see that as the glass is now 6% full or 94% empty. I think definitely that it is 94% empty and needs to be filled more. But how you do it, I think there are three or four things that can and should be done. One is a better understanding among should needs to be developed among gatekeepers, the news gatekeepers, the editors, the sub-editors, the chiefs of bureau, because I think reporters are now extremely interested because they are the ones who are going out into the field, whatever little, and they can see what's going on. It's the people sitting in the newsroom who are unable to see or unwilling to see what actually is going on. That's my point number one. And my point number two is that I really don't think traditional general news media, especially news TV channels in India, are going to change their stance on this massively. It doesn't bother me too much because the fragmentation of the media landscape is now so great that even the large newspapers and large news TV channels do not have as much heft as they used to have. It is now, I mean, a social media influencer can have as much, if not more, uh, influence on policymakers as a very large newspaper or a news TV channel. So that is the way the media landscape is evolving in the country, and I think many other countries as well. And I do think that if you want good climate stories, that may be the place to concentrate on.
Tanara, do you want to add something? And then there are some questions I'll.
Yeah, I mean, Joydeep can speak to India. I wouldn't know nearly as much, but what I can say is there's two answers with the global news industry. One to the solutions focus and why that's paid for by grants and not taken so seriously, and then one for the climate coverage. So yeah, you're right. Often it's kind of NGOs, certain types of news organizations that are often really drawn to solutions journalism and require no selling to them, that they buy in. And the old school legacy media organizations are more resistant. And I think it goes back to what I was saying about culture. There is a deep culture that pushes back against it. And the younger journalists coming forward are not so enmeshed in that news culture, but the gatekeepers, the older journalists are. And I would argue, although you can work with the more innovative, nimble news organizations, if you really want this approach to work, you do have to work with the legacy guys as well. And it's a harder sell, but it's definitely worth trying. And it just takes time. And, you know, I like working with the most skeptical, cynical journalists because I think in some ways they're some of the best, you know, and if you can persuade them, as Joydeep's been speaking about, that solutions journalism can be just as skeptical and rigorous, then I think you can get somewhere. And I think the climate coverage thing, yeah, you know, budgets, time, you know, everyone's under strain, something's got to fall out. But I also think it's a way of looking at climate coverage. You know, the three stories that Joydeep talked about were so nuanced and thoughtful and systemic, but often old school newsrooms think about climate coverage as climate crisis. And if you only see it in that frame, then other issues get pushed out with the news cycle. You know, something political happens. But if you're thinking of it as a structural issue, like this is the society needs to move into the space, this is politics, this is economics, this is infrastructure, then it stays in the news cycle. But if you only think of it as like, I'm going to talk about climate change when there's a flood, when there's a drought, there will be limited coverage. So NRK in Norway, they ended up doing 2 different climate desks. One was for climate change events, and one was for more ongoing investigations, because they felt that if they just did it as a series of events, it would always get pushed out by the war in Ukraine or whatever. So this other desk would continue to do their coverage, and that wouldn't be at the mercy of the news cycle. So yeah, those are just 2 thoughts I had.
Thank you, Sanara. Krishna, Chaitanya, Joydeep, do you want to add something, or can we go to the next question?
Yeah.
Yeah, Krishna, do you have a question? Or...
Yeah, hi everyone. So, the solution journalism, see, in all the newsrooms, even in our newsroom, when we have the editorial meetings and all, there is an increasing conversation around the solution journalism and how we should approach and how not to be too cynical. But there are certain cases. For example, now Chennai is getting a third reservoir in Kovalam, Mahabalipuram region. That's been a biggest topic. Now tenders are getting floated, and CM also has just inaugurated it. But on one hand, we have a scenario like, almost all the groundwater aquifers are getting overexploited because that's a IT corridor and that's a booming population in south of Chennai. At the same time, the area where the site selection, the area where it is coming up, about I think 4,200 acres is where it will get occupied, and a lot of wetlands are going into this particular reservoir project. And there's a huge hue and cry from the fishing populations, because if you scan through the DPRs and if you scan through the project documents, some of the areas termed as wastelands are being actually, they are the fishing grounds. There's a lot of resistance from the inland fishermen also. But how do we approach such kind of stories? Like, either you have to take, if you can't just report. If you report on the project, you have to tell the problem and what kind of ecological damage it will do and what kind of impact it will have on the biodiversity. And at the same time, this project will quench the thirst of about 1 million population, and it's just growing, and it will reduce the stress on the groundwater. But the equally damaging are the coastal wetlands, which are equally critical for they are the natural flood carriers. They help you in flood mitigation. They help you in certain groundwater recharge. It'll help you arrest the seawater incursion into the inland. So, where do you sit? Like, my editor will say, you're being too cynical. You're always bombarding the government, and let's not sound too anti-development, especially when the elections are around the corner. And so there are a lot of complications involved. But as a journalist, where do we sit here? Whether we should, I can't see. Either I have to file a story against the project, or incorporate all the fishermen's sources. Yeah.
Yeah. So your question is, when there is so much complexity, when it is good and it's so good and so bad, what do you do? Joydeep, do you want to take this one?
I think it will. I would definitely do these stories, and try to push them. There is no doubt about that. That entire Chennai to Mahabalipuram corridor is a disaster zone, and it's a living lab of climate impacts. And one thing I tell you, for not just for you, but for everybody out there who wants to do stories from Tamil Nadu and Chennai and around, that is actually an area from which, if you do stories, you will get traction, because the people who have been affected, are people like you and me. They are not poor fishers. They are not poor farmers. Your editor cannot tell you that, oh, those people you're writing about, they don't read our newspaper or they don't see our TV channel. Because people like you and me have bought flats, bought apartments, with their life savings along that Chennai Mahabalipuram corridor, and they cannot move in because of sea level rise and saltwater incursion. So then there is no water in those flats that can be used. So there are hundreds and hundreds of flats lying empty, and people have spent their entire life savings out there. So these are good stories. Absolutely, that stories that need to be done. Just because I'm saying that we should do solution stories doesn't mean we shouldn't do the other stories. Absolutely, I think we should.
Right. There are 2 comments / questions in the chat, and one is by Varsha Singh. It's more of a comment. You can read that. And
Okay, I'm reading Anita's. What
Anita has
environmental issues are emerging along the Nepal-India border? Wow, that's a very long list. How should they be addressed? How they should be addressed is jointly. That is the important thing to remember here. And that is where you will fall foul of the IR people, the international relations people. That is the problem. Because the environment doesn't follow political boundaries. Rivers flow from Nepal to India. Air pollution flows from India to Nepal. Neither follows political boundaries. But the moment you say that, oh, we should have joint groups, joint studies, joint action, you'll fall foul of the security wonks and the international relations wonks. So it's important to have your facts over there strong enough to be able to convince your editor to run those stories. And if you're asking about a list of environmental issues, that's a laundry list, just about anything you can think of. So maybe we can take this offline. What can be done to improve the story on e-autos? What can be done to improve the story on e-autos? I've already said, bring up some of the questions that are in the second half of the story. Bring it up to the second paragraph. That will immediately strengthen that story massively. So then your reader knows that you are not doing PR, you are not on one side or the other, that you are providing an objective story. Okay, let me go to the next one.
Varsha's is more of a comment, then
Okay,
Preeti
I'll
has a
skip that.
question. Preeti has a question in the end.
Okay, Preeti has a question. Governments always explain away their actions with argument development, like they're doing in the Nicobar region. How does one intervene through journalism when they do not wish to hear journalists? I really don't know. If people do not wish to hear journalists, what can we do? We can only do our stories. I completely understand what you're saying. Pankaj and I have been working on this along with so many others. We are not, and I know, we are not activists. And for the sake of our credibility, we should not turn ourselves into activists. We can only do our stories. And if they do not wish to hear journalists, I really don't know what we can do about it. I know that I'm running.
We are at time in another 2 minutes. Do you have any closing remarks, Joydeep?
So I will not go through the rest of this because you will get a copy of this. Everything here is hyperlinked, so you can go through that. So instead of that, since we are at time, I'll hand it back to Mahima.
Thank you, Joydeep. I do recommend going through Joydeep's presentations. The last few slides are really useful tricks and tips and links to resources. Thank you so much to the audience and Sanara and Joydeep especially for making time to talk to all of us today. What today's discussion makes very clear is that covering climate in India is not just about documenting impacts or crises, but about asking better questions of systems, looking at solutions, resilience, and a whole host of other intersectoral links as well. Thank you so much again for joining and hope to see you in the next webinar.